All right, I will say good morning, and let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Share to thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsor for the month of Nisan, Saeed Sima Haken, for dedicating all the Shurm and Rochels this month to show their Hakarat Hatov to Hashem for all of his Nisim and Niflaos. May Hakadosh Baruch Hu continue to bestow his rachmanus on us, redeem all of the hostages, and bring complete Hatzlacha to EretzYisrael and to Am Yisrael. Also, a dedication aliya nishmas Yerachmiel Buck's father, Martin Buck, Motle ben Chaim Leib HaKohen, zichron. To thank our week of learning sponsors, the Rom and Bravo families, aliya nishmas, their father Mordechai ben Yitzchak. Our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Yerachmiel and Judy Nudelman, in memory of Judy's mother, Temmy Schwartz, Tema, Rochel, Bas, Shmuel, Zusiya. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, all of the neshama slav and aliya, the families a neshama, and halavai shi v'soros tovos for all of Klal Yisrael. So with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, but a really exciting daf ahead of us. Baruch Hashem, today's daf is Nun Aleph 51, and we are picking up in Hashem on the bottom of Nun Amud Beis 50b. Actually, we read a little bit further, but let's pick up at the two dots. Ad Masai Motle Hachzir. Supposed to, if you remember again, 4 lines up from the bottom. So if you remember again, in yesterday's Gemara, we were introduced to two fundamental machloksim. Machlokis number one between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Tarfon is how much constitutes Ona. The Rabbanan saying a sixth, Rabbi Tarfon saying a third. That's machlokis one. Machlokis two is what is the window, the refund window for Ona. Again, the Rabbanan saying until you have enough time to show it to someone, to realize that you've been impacted by Ona. Rabbi Tarfon, that entire first day, right? The entire day of the sale itself. Rabbi Tarfon's window being larger than the window of the Rabbanan. Fine. Says the Gemara. We'll say one other thing that we've also seen is, remember again, we have our construct for Ona based on Rava. Less than a sixth, forgiven, mechila. A sixth, the Ona must be returned, but the transaction stands. More than a sixth, either party has the ability to void the transaction. We've also seen, but we'll see this reinforced again today, that halacha l'maisa Ona, or I should say the refund window, only applies to who? Only applies to the purchaser, because he has the object in his hand and therefore has it readily available to see. Has he been impacted by Ona or not? But for the seller, it appears based on yesterday's daf, and we reinforce that today as well, that window really doesn't apply. Why doesn't the window apply? Because since he doesn't have the item readily accessible to him, therefore again it's hard for him to know that he's been impacted by enough. More on that in Eretz Hashem today. So let's go. Says the Gemara. So Rav Nachman is supposed to hear this is Lo shana ela lokeach. When we speak about a refund window, that's only for the purchaser. But ultimately, the seller could go ahead. I would say if the seller has been impacted by Ona, so the seller has the ability to go ahead and retract. Right, the seller has the ability to retract forever. So the name of Metzia, and again, I will say the logic being, we'll see in just a moment. Look at Rashi. Last 2 lines on the daf. Rashi says, "Mocher she'in biyado malaharos v'limloch eno makir ba'ana also." So we'll say because the seller doesn't have the object in his possession, therefore again he does not realize that he has undersold the object. Ad sheyira talis acheres kidmusa. So we'll say, so when does the seller realize that he has undersold his object? When does he realize it? The next time he has the ability to sell a similar or like object, or see a similar or like object, and he realizes, hey, I totally messed up on the price. Hilchach li olam chozer im lo nisyakru. So therefore, I will say again, the seller really does not have this defined window. The seller has, as long as he needs to realize the impact, the Ona. So I'll say, if you hold that halacha, I'm sorry. So Gemara says, I skipped the line. So we'll say, remember again, look at the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? The Tagrei Lud, right? Everything always circles back to the Lud merchants. The Lud merchants were very excited when they heard about Rabbi Tarfon, and then ultimately, again, when they heard about his refund window, they went ahead and they decided to go back to the Chachamim. If you say that the seller always has the ability to go ahead and reclaim Ona, Top of Nun Aleph 51a. This is why ultimately again they returned to the position of the Chachamim. Rashi says, Shehem hayu mochrin ve'inan nanin b'harchavas zman hachzar de beitarfon shefil rabbanan v'olam chozrin. So Rabbi say again, because they as sellers, they did not benefit at all from Rabbi Tarfon, since the window of return is the same according to everyone. But if you say that the seller is treated the same as the purchaser, and therefore the same refund window that applies to the purchaser applies to the seller, so my nafka mina. So what does it matter then who you paskin like? Kihechi da avdi le rabbanan takanta lelokeach, hachenami avdi le rabbanan takanta lemokar. The same way that the rabbanan went ahead and did something to benefit the purchaser, the same benefit ultimately again would be done in order to benefit the seller. To which the Gemara says, hachenami avdi rabbanan takanta lemokar. Tagre lud lo shliach deto. So we'll say, what a statement. Apparently, again, the Lud merchants, they didn't make mistakes. Also, can you imagine if somebody could say that about you, right? In other words, right? The Lud merchants, they didn't. Now, what it means is, and it means, we'll say, obviously in this limited context, that halacha l'maisa, when they sold stuff, they knew what they were selling it for. They were very proficient in their malacha. Therefore, it was very uncommon for them to make mistakes in the sale price. Because of that, halacha l'maisa, they didn't really benefit from any kind of prolonged window for ona because they did not undercharge objects. Okay, so we'll say incredible. Ushbezichne d'Roi bar Chama. Interesting story over here. So ushbezichne means the landlord. The landlord of Roi bar Chama, Zobin Chamra, Vita. He bought wine, and he made a mistake. He overpaid for it. So the Gemara says, Ashkechei dahava atziv. So what happened? Roi bar Chama found him, and he was sad, right? He had overpaid for the wine. Amrali amayatzivis, why are you sad? Roi bar Chama said to him, so the landlord responded, Savini chamra v'taya, I'm sad because I overpaid for something, right? I bought wine and I overpaid for it. Amrali zil hadibach, so go back. Apparently he had paid more than a sixth. Right? So Roi bar Chama said, it's not a problem. Go back and you can reclaim your money. Amrale hasha hayli yoser michdesh sha'ar letagar o lekrovi. So Roi bar Chama, you know what? The window closed. I already waited too long. I waited longer than the amount of time that it would have taken for me to show my friend or a merchant or a relative. Shadri kamei Rav Nachman. So Roi bar Chama is very beautiful. Roi bar Chama was trying to find sort of an eitzah. So it was a second wide line 51a. So he sent the question over to Rav Nachman. Amrale. Lo shana ela lokeach. So his Rav Nachman said, this concept ultimately again, I'm sorry about that, this is what he sold the wine. I'm sorry, he didn't purchase the wine, he sold the wine. So Amrle, lo shana ela lokeach. That right, the landlord sold the wine, not bought the wine. Lo shana ela lokeach. When is there a refund window? That's only for the purchaser. However, again, about mochar the olam chozer. But ultimately, again, the seller always has the ability. Seller doesn't have a window. Rather, the seller always has the opportunity to reclaim on. I will say again, I just want to be clear. Remember, everybody's governed by the same structure. Less than a sixth mechila, 1/6 returns, transaction stands. More than a sixth, either party has the ability to void the transaction. So that's true whether it's the purchaser or whether it's the seller. The difference, the Gemara says, is that the purchaser has a defined window in which to reclaim ona. The seller does not. The seller could reclaim ona literally again forever. Says the Gemara, my time. Why is there this distinction between the seller and the purchaser? It's very simple. Lokeach mekcho biyado. The purchaser, because he has the object in his hand, he purchased it. So again, I will say he always has the ability to show it to someone. So in other words, essentially the seller could easily discover whether or not he has been impacted by ona, since he has the object with him. On the other hand, so the seller will very quickly find out, did he go ahead and make a mistake or not? But a mocher, the seller, who does not go ahead and have the object with him, obviously he sold the object, we'll say, when does the seller become aware if he committed, if he was impacted by ona? When does he become aware of that? He becomes aware of it when he stumbles upon another like transaction. So because he doesn't have the object with him, there's no way for him to really get that more immediate feedback about whether or not the transaction was a good transaction, not a good transaction. So the only way he knows is sometime later on when he engages in a similar transaction, then he'll find out if he had ona or not. Okay, so we'll say, so now we've essentially codified that concept. Another case, Ho Gavra, Dahabenachit Varshechi Lizabuni. So we'll say there was a guy, this is actually an interesting case. There was a guy, we'll call him Ruvain, right? Ruvain was going ahead and selling silk ribbons. Silk ribbons. Now listen to his chap. Kari Shisa V'Shavi Chamsha. Now we'll say he wanted to sell them for six dinars, 6 zuzim, right? But they were only really worth 5. I will say the problem, of course, is that's going to be a potential ona situation. So he had a great chap. Now, but again, Ruvain knew if somebody would offer him 5.5, he would take it. So it was worth 5. He wanted to sell it for 6, but if he would have been offered 5.5, he would take it. Watch this, this is great. Also, Gavra va'amar. So listen to this. Another guy, we'll call him Shimon, comes along, and Shimon says, "Look, iya hevna lechamshu palga." Havi mechila. So listen to this. So Shimon says, listen, if I pay Ruvain 5.5, so then that is less than a sixth overcharging, and less than a sixth is mechila. So I'll have no recourse. Here's what I'm going to do. Etein lo shisa va'atvi ledina. So listen to this Rochel. So Shimon says, you know what? I'm going to pay the 6. And when I pay the 6, what is that going to be? That's going to be ona. And I'll be able to go ahead and bring him to Beis Din. And I will say, and I remember again, this is not more than a 6th. So I should say at a 6th. So no, at a 6th, what happens? This transaction stands, but you get your money back. So it turns out that Shimon will ultimately end up purchasing the ribbons for how much? For 5. So if I pay 5.5, it's going to be mechila, and I pay that extra half dinar, right? But if I pay 6 and then sum for ona, I'll get my dinar back. Ultimately again, and I'll only pay 5 for the ribbons. It's a good chap. So the Gemara says, listen to this. So Rava said, no, so apparently Shimon did this. The case came before Rava, and what happened? Amalei, lo shano ela b'lokech min hatagar. Rava said, it's actually fascinating. We're going to talk about this more. The concept of ona only applies when you are purchasing from a merchant. Ava b'lokech mi balabayis ein lo olav ona. So Rava said, this is fascinating. The concept of ona only applies when you are purchasing from a merchant. But if you are purchasing from a balabayis, right, the balabas, someone is just selling their stuff, the laws of ona do not apply. Right? So no matter what they charge, the balabas has the right to charge, and there is no recourse. If you choose to pay it, then you've paid it, and that's all. I'll say, what's the distinction? This is incredible. Look at Rashi. First short line in Rashi, balabayis. Rashi says, Tachshitin uklei tashmish shalo chavivin alav. So what's with the balabayis? Literally again, it's tachshitin. Tachshitin means his jewelry. Klei tashmish shalo means his stuff. His stuff are very important to him, are near and dear to him. Ve'eno mochran ela biyoker. So we'll say, so apparently, it's not common for a balabayis to sell stuff. Right? If a balabayis sells stuff professionally, it is not a balabayis. What is he? He's a taga, he's a merchant. So a balabayis really only sells things maybe under financial duress or maybe under certain unique circumstances. And the stuff that he sells, he's not a manufacturer, right? So therefore, again, the stuff that he's selling is his own stuff. And it's near and dear to him. It has a certain, whether it's a sentimental value or an actual value. And therefore, again, I will say it's understood that when you're buying from a balabayis, your transactions are taking place outside of the marketplace. So because you're outside of the marketplace, a balabayis is probably going to charge you more, right? For whatever the reason, sentimental value, he needs the money, he has whatever it might be. And therefore the laws of ona do not apply. And I will say, here's what's interesting. Look, finish Rashi, he says, Amochron biyoker, v'havelei kimefarish, yodea anish yesh bo'ona, terminu lekamon, in lavona. So we'll say, it's almost as if, when you buy from a balabayis, you are accepting the fact that you may be getting overcharged for an object, and you also agree to the fact that this transaction is not governed by the laws of ona. Incredible, no? Absolutely incredible. Makes a lot of sense, but incredible. So if I will say again, this guy's chap did not work at all, right? Because remember again, Ruvain wasn't a merchant. Rather, Reuven ultimately, again, was a balabayis. Another case. Hu gavra davenakit kipi lezavuni. There was a guy who was selling earrings. Rashi says, kipi are nizamim. Nizamim literally means like nose rings, but earrings, nose rings. So he was selling earrings. So what happened? Kari shisin v'shaveh chamshin. Same case. So the guy was going ahead and he was calling out earrings for 6 dinar, or for 6 zuz. Right? And it turns out they were only worth 5. V'yav yahavne chamshin v'chamsha. Right? Have a shakel. But again, Reuven already understood that if somebody went up from 5.5, he would take it. Also, Gavra v'amar yahavne lechamshin v'chamsha. Havil mechila. So what happens? Same case. Shimon comes along and says, you know what? Here's the problem. If I offer him 5.5, that's mechila. And I'm going to end up paying 5.5. I have a better idea. Asa hahu gavra v'amar yehevne chamshin v'chamsha havil mechila. Atain le shisin ve'et bay ledina. Same chap. So Shimon says, I'll pay him 6. Then I'll sue him for no. I'll end up getting my zuz back, and the transaction will stand. So I'll end up walking away getting the earrings for 5 zuz. They came up for Rav Chisda, and once again, Amar le lo shana ela belokech min atagar, aval belokech mi balabayis ein lo onav, ein lo alav ona. So it says, we said before, the halacha l'maisa, the laws of ona only apply in a what we'll call a marketplace transaction, which is a transaction between a merchant and a purchaser. But when it is a non-marketplace transaction, i.e., you are buying from a private householder, the laws of Ona do not apply. Incredible. So Amle Rav Dimi, Yasher. Rav Dimi says, Shkoyach. Yeah, that's correct. V'chein Amar Balazar, Yasher. V'ha'nan Tanan. But we learned, Kashem Sha'ona lehedyot. Kach ona letagar. Rabbi say, but we have another brisa or another mishnah, and the mishnah says the same way that ona applies with a regular person, ona also applies with a merchant. So Rabbi say here the mishnah clearly makes it sound that what ona does apply even to a transaction with a balabayis. Rabbi say this is fascinating. So my hedyot, what is a hedyot? La balabayis. So the Gemara says, is that not just a regular householder? So you see that ona applies with all transactions. So I said, it's actually fascinating. Amrav Chisda biditzraisa aval mani tashmishe diakiri alei lo mezabin lo ila b'damisiyah. So I say, so you're right. When does ona apply even with a balabayis? Biditzraisa. Rashi says begade kanvus ha'omdim limacher. So I say, here's what's interesting. What's the whole chap that ona doesn't apply to a balabayis? What's the logic there? The logic is, what is a balabayis selling? What is he selling? His own stuff. His own stuff has a value to him, so he's only selling it because the rest, some other circumstance, and therefore, again, it's understood that when he has to sell his own stuff, Lamaisa, there's a premium. So also listen to this. However, if the balabayis is selling generic, nondescript stuff that has no sentimental value, so their example over here is bitzraisa, right? Which are like apparently these canvas items. They're nondescript, generic items. I will say there's no sentimental value associated with those items. Those items are subject to ona. So an interesting carve out over here that when halacha l'maisa, when you're going ahead and buying something nondescript from the balabayis, so the Gemara suggests where there's obviously no sentimental value, that transaction could be governed by ona. But when halacha l'maisa, you are buying something that is clearly special to the balabayis, and when they say special, both sides, it doesn't have to mean that it's been in his family for 17 generations. What it just means is it's something that's uniquely his, and that he wouldn't normally part with, if he didn't need the money. Under those circumstances, ona doesn't apply. All right, incredible. Let's finish off. Money to tashmishte. I will say, but things that the balabayis himself uses. So we'll see. That's what it means. That's the definition of balabayis property. Things that he uses, things that he normally uses. The akiri alei. They're precious to him. So lo mazbin lahu ila b'dami yiseri. He wouldn't sell it if not at a higher value. Okay, so Rabbi says that's we come out with halacha l'maisa. Laws of ona only apply in a merchant transaction, do not apply in a balabayis transaction. Fascinating. Mishnah. Both say still with ona. Let's go back to Mishnah. Echad halakech ve'echad hamocher yesh lahen ona. So we'll say here we go. both the buyer and the seller are subject to the laws of Onah. So I'll say summary, and we said this before earlier, that Onah means overcharging, which is right, when we think about Onah, the classic case of Onah is I've overcharged by a sixth, but there is also undercharging. If it turns out that the buyer undersold the item by less than a sixth, more than a sixth, same halachos applied. Kishem shonah lehedyot, kach onah tagar. We just saw that. Right? The same way that there is Onah for a balabas, so too there is Onah for a merchant. Rabbi Huda Omer, Ein Onah ala tagar. Rabbi Huda says there is no Onah for a merchant. Now, as you will say, we're going to have to see what that means, because that doesn't seem to make all that much sense, but we'll see in the Gemara what that means. Mi shehutel alav yado al ha'alyona. I will say whoever is impacted by the Onah has the upper hand. And again, we'll see exactly what that means as well. This seems to be reminiscent of the position of Rabbi Huda Hanasi. Rabbi Huda Hanasi, as we saw in yesterday's daf, doesn't agree with Rava. Rather, again, seems to say that even in the case of a sixth, Rabbi Huda Hanasi seems to indicate that you could cancel the transaction if you want. But again, we'll discuss that. So whoever's impacted by the Onah has the upper hand. Ratza Omer Lo Tenli Ma'osi, O Tenli Ma'shinisan. I will say here it is. So again, right, so Rabbi Huda says, so ultimately again, whoever was impacted by the Onah has the upper hand, which means that what? Has the ability to say, either give me back my money, or to cancel the transaction, or give me back my object. Okay, so again, we'll see that more in the Gemara. Fine. Says the Gemara, Benhani Mili. So we'll say, from where do we know this? Now, where do we know what? From where do we know that Onah, that both the buyer and the purchaser, the buyer and the seller are both subject to the laws of Onah? From where do we know that? So the Gemara is Benhani Mili, Tanarabanan, V'chisimkuru mimkar lamisecha, al tonu. The pasuk says, when you sell something to someone, don't overcharge them. So ini alashin is an alokeach. So I'll say, so from this pasuk I know, who are we talking about over here? This is the purchaser. So from here I know that the purchaser is subject to the laws of Onah. Okay, so the Gemara says, Nisana mocher minayin. How do I know that the laws of Onah apply even to the seller? Right? Let's say the seller goes ahead and undercharges by a sixth or more. That Allah the laws of Onah apply. Talmud lomar okano al tonu. So we'll say it's interesting. It's reading the end of the pasuk a little bit differently. Okana, or if you are the purchaser, al tonu. Do not go ahead and impact the seller with Onah. Don't underpay the seller. All right. So also it's therefore from the pasuk we see that halacha l'maisa, the laws of Onah apply both to seller and purchaser. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. In other words, why wouldn't I have automatically assumed that the laws of Onah just apply both to mocher and to lokeach, the seller and to purchaser? The pasuk obviously has to go out of its way to indicate that it applies to both. Why? I'll tell you why. If the pasuk would have just said that the halachos of Onah apply to the seller, because ultimately, again, because the mocher knows his wares, so the seller, in other words, the seller who knows what it is that he's selling, he is governed by the laws of Onah, right? He can't oversell this item, because we'll say he knows what it's worth. So therefore, because he knows what it's worth, this is his malacha. Therefore, he is subject to the prohibition of Onah. But a purchaser who may not be as well versed in the laws of Onah, I might have thought that's what? That if halacha l'maaseh he ends up underbuying, we'll call it, right? Underbuying, buying the object for less than it's worth, he's not subject to Onah. Because again, he just doesn't know. So because he doesn't know, the Torah doesn't hold him accountable for essentially underpaying for the object. Because of rachmanus lokeach mishum the kakani, the amri inshi. So let's break that up. Because the Torah would have just said a buy lokeach, that a purchaser is subject to the laws of Onah, that halacha l'maisa, again, that when you purchase something, if you undersell for it, those laws of Onah. Why? The kimle bizivinte. No, I'm sorry, I just skipped. Vikas of Rachmana Mocha Mishum Dikimle Bizvinte. No, did I just? Sorry. Vikas of Rachmana Lokeach Mishum Dekakani. So I'll say, if it would have just had laws of Onah apply to the purchaser. Why? Because since the purchaser is purchasing the item, therefore what? The Amri Inshi Zavanta Kanisa. I will say, here's what's interesting. In general, when you purchase something, so remember again, why does a person purchase an item? Because in the eyes of Chazal, just having money lying around is not necessarily the best idea. Now again, remember, we did see that it is always good to keep some level of liquidity, right, in your assets. But in general, you want to go ahead and invest your money into something else. So therefore, when you buy something, I will say, the mocher is only going to buy something if what? If he's really well versed in what it is that he's buying. And therefore, again, he has an acute awareness as to the value of the item. And that's why perhaps he definitely would be subject to the laws of Ona, because he knows what he's paying or what he's not paying. Ava mocher da'avudi kamovid. I will say, but a mocher is losing an object. I will say. And selling an object is a big deal. Even though you're getting cash, selling an object is a big deal. Therefore, again, about mocher, the avude kamovid, the Armenian, as people say, zabin ovid. People say that when you sell something, you lose it. In other words, a sale, I will say, was considered to be the loss of an item. Even though you're gaining the cash, you're losing the item, versus a purchase, which was considered to be a gaining of an item. So because you're losing an item, therefore maybe the Torah does not subject the seller to the laws of Ona. Therefore, both say, I need the halacha to teach me that both purchaser and seller are both subject to the laws of Ona. All right, beautiful. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Einon Ala Tegar. So Rabbi Yehuda says there is no Ona ultimately, again, to the merchant. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? Mishum shehu tagar ein lo ona. I don't understand. What does that mean? Because he's a merchant, he's not subject to the laws of ona. I will say that seems quite counterintuitive. Amrav Nachman Amarav bitagar safsar shanu. So I will say this is actually quite fascinating. Who are we talking about? What type of merchant are we talking about? So I will say essentially like I guess you would call it like a wholesale merchant. What does that mean? In other words, he buys and he quickly sells. He buys and he quickly sells. So he doesn't. He's the go-between. He's the go-between. Look at Rashi. Safsar kona umocher miyad tamid. So the way this works, I will say, is see when we think about a merchant, what do we think about? We think about a person who acquires merchandise, holds it for some amount of time, and then goes ahead and sells it off. A safsar, bosai, is a merchant for whom there's very quick turnaround time. See, he purchases, but he sells it quickly. So that's when the Gemara says over here that Rabbi Yehuda says there's no ona by this guy. Now, why is that? Amarav Nachman, Amarav, b'tagar safsar b'sar. My time, what's the reason? Meida yada dizabinte kama shavya. Supposed to listen to this. Now, understand, when we say that, when Rabbi Yehuda says that there is no ona by him, what that means to say is, if this merchant, right, I don't know if there's a name, I don't know, in the marketplace, I don't know if there's a name for a guy like this, right, he flips the merchandise very quickly. A distributor, okay, right, so, I'm sorry? Wholesaler, right, so he goes ahead, he's getting, in other words, it's in and out. So a guy like this, Rabbi Yehuda says that halacha l'maisa, he is not subject to the laws of Ona. Now, what does it mean he's not subject to the laws of Ona? It means, if it turns out that he undersold, he can't claim ona. Again, if he oversells it, the purchaser, of course, does have a claim of ona, but if it turns out that he undersold it, he has no claim of ona. Why not? Rabbi says, so this is fascinating. So why is that? So Rav Nachman explains, so listen to this. My time, a merchant like this, he knows exactly how much his property is worth, the merchandise is worth. But what happens? So I'll say, but again, if he ends up underselling it, he's fine with it. He's mocha. Why? Listen to this. So why? If he knows the value, then why did he undersell it? So I'll say this Mishum the Isrami lezevinte achrise bahashta miha kahadrebe. So I'll say this is fascinating. Because sometimes a merchant like this will be like this. He'll say, listen, I have this merchandise, but he has his eye. So you'll both say, what's the chap of the safsar? Because he buys and sells very quickly, he always has his mind on the next deal. So because he has his mind on the next deal, he might have merchandise now. And he's like, okay, I got to get my hand on that merchandise. But right now, what do I need to do? I need cash. So it's worth it for him to sell the current merchandise at a discount in order to what? Get cash and go ahead and buy the next piece of merchandise. I will say, by the way, there's a gadlus in that, right? There's a gadlus in that. The gadlus in that is to be the kind of person that always has your mind on the next thing. Now, you have to be careful with that because sometimes in life, people are always thinking about like what's next. And sometimes when you do that, you have the inability to go ahead and focus on enjoying what you have or what is. So that's a danger. You see this, unfortunately, very much like in the realm of materialism, right? That a person gets something and then they're like, okay, what's next? What's the next big thing? And then a person never is able to enjoy what they have. But at least in the realm of ruchnius, I will say, in the realm of ruchnius, I want to be a ruchni safsar. That's what I want. In ruchnius, it is always what's next. What's more? How can I grow? What can I do? What's the next Kabbalah? What's the next limud? And it's incredible. It says the safsar, but unlike the safsar, therefore is willing to sell the current merchandise at a discount in order to pull out the cash, let transaction go to the next. One has to be careful that even if they are a ruchnius safsar, that my future endeavors do not come at the expense of the present ones. In any event, that's why when Rabbi Yehuda says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says that there is no ona by a tagar, by a merchant, he means the safsar, because it would be common for the safsar to intentionally undersell an item in order to get cash in his hands so that he can go ahead and purchase the next item. And even if he claims ona now, okay, that's because he has some seller's remorse. That's it, but we don't pay attention to that. So we'll say that's what Nachman's interpretation. Ravashi says, my ain tagar ona. What does it mean when we say that aloch l'maisa, the merchant has no ona, eno b'toras ona. So we'll say it means that he's not subject to the laws of ona, meaning what? Shafilu pachos mikedei ona chozer. So we'll say this is actually very interesting, that halacha l'maisa, Ravashi says that for a merchant, even less than a sixth, he has the ability to go ahead and retract on the transaction. Now, why is that? Rashi says, "Shafilu pachos michadeona chozer in nisana techayiv teluyin bekach v'tiknu lo sheyachzar." So we'll say this is fascinating. Ravashi says that according to Rabbi Yehuda says that a merchant has the ability to reclaim ona even less than a sixth. Why? Because we'll say this is his parnasa. So we'll say, so two diametrically opposed interpretations. Here's what we have. We have Rabbi Yehuda saying in the Mishnah that a merchant is not subject to the laws of ona. Meaning, I will say, so what that means is for him, not for the purchaser. For him, he's not subject to the laws of ona. What does that mean? Machlokes Rav Nachman and Rav Ashi. Rav Nachman says we're talking about, again, a wholesaler distributor. So it's common for him to sell objects at a discount. And therefore, again, if he has a change of heart and he wants to reclaim the ona, we say, sorry, you know exactly what you were doing. You needed to sell merchandise to free up capital. Fine. So therefore, again, no ona. Rav Ashi, it means is that even by anyone else, less than a sixth is mechila. But by a merchant, even less than a sixth, he has the ability to go ahead and reclaim that. Why? Because this is his parnasa. It's incredible. Tanya Kavase Rav Nachman, a brayso that supports Rav Nachman. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Tagar ein lo ona mipnei shehu baki. So also listen to this. So the brayso says, according to Rabbi Yehuda says that a tagar, a merchant, does not have ona. Why not? Because he's an expert. So we'll say, so again, that seems to support Rav Nachman, that a merchant knows exactly how much an item is worth, right? How much it can be paid, how much it can be bought for, and therefore, it's fascinating. If a merchant undersells an object, the halacha assumes that what? He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing, and halacha l'maisa again, he chooses to undersell. And I will say, now just to point out, we don't paskin this way. And we assume, I will say, the laws of ona apply to anyone and everyone. So therefore, again, merchant, regular guy, right? The only exception, I take that back. Very important qualification based on the last Gemara. The only person the laws of ona don't apply to is who? The balabas. Right? When you are buying from a private householder, that is a non-market transaction. And on a non-market transaction, there is no ona. All the parties involved know that this is being governed by a separate set of rules. But otherwise, again, as it comes to merchant, laws of ona apply to him. Incredible. Misha hotal alav yadu ala yona. So we'll say whoever is impacted by the ona has the upper hand. So what does this mean? So money must nisim. We'll say whose opinion does this reflect? Lo Rabbi Nasan v'lo Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. It's not Rabbi Nasan, nor is it Rabbi Yehuda Nasi from yesterday's daf. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Nasan. If it's Rabbi Nasan, mas nisin katani ratza, ubraisa lo katani ratza. If it's Rabbi Nasan, so ultimately again, the Mishnah says that whoever wants to void it could void it, right? And or I should say whoever is the impacted, I shouldn't say whoever wants to, whoever is impacted by the ona has the ability to go ahead and negate the sale. Ubraisa, and the Braisa does not say rasa. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi mas nisim katani lokeach. The Mishnah says ultimately again the lokeach has the ability to do so. Braisa katani mocher. So what's going on over here? Rabbi Lazar ona zu eni yodea mishna. So Rabbi Lazar says this statement of ona, I do not know who authored it. I don't know who authored it. Rashi says Mishnah Seinuzu. Our Mishnah, I don't know who authored it. Rabbi Amar Li'olam Rabbi Nasani. Rabbi says no. In fact, it is Rabbi Nasan. The Gemara says Vitani Nami Bebraisa Ratza, and therefore change the Braisa to also read that ultimately whoever is impacted by the ona has the ability to go ahead and negate the sale. Rabbi Amar Li'olam Rabbi Huda Nasi. Rabbi says really it's Rabbi Huda Nasi. Umay Deshiba Masnisin Kamafarish Braisa. And that which was left out of the Mishnah was subsequently explained in the Braisa. Amar Rav Ashi says, Dekinami Diktani. This would seem to be a correct interpretation. We could support this. Echad halokech ve'echad hamocher. So we'll say it says whether it's the purchaser or whether it's the seller, umefarish le'lokeach. And ultimately that explains the case as dealing with the purchaser. Shmamina shiure shaire lemocher shmamina. So see from here again, I will say the Braisa is just coming to pick up where the Mishnah left off and explain the case as dealing with the mocher who suffered from ona. Okay, so we'll say, so again, now I want to point out, we don't hold this way either, right? Because remember again, Abosai, we hold that the laws of ona are objective and apply to both parties. So again, less than a sixth, mechila. At a sixth, ona is returned, whichever direction it was in the transaction stands. More than a sixth, either party has the ability to go ahead and void the transaction. Itmar. Here we go, Bosai. This is fascinating. Homer the Chavero, Almanas she'in lecha alai ona. So I'll say, this is a great case. Right? I go over to Ruvain and say, Ruvain, here's the deal. I'm going to sell you, I don't know, grain. Right? And I'm going to say grain on the condition that there is no ona for this transaction. So we're agreeing. The laws of ona do not govern this transaction. So we'll say, what's the shaila? What's the shaila? Does this work? Can you go ahead and make such a condition? Rav Amar Yeshla Lavona. So Rav says there is ona. Even if he said there's no ona, there is ona. Shmuel says, Ein lo lavona, there's no ona. Look, if the parties agreed to such a condition, then in fact there is no ona. So we'll say, let's analyze this. This is great. Lema Rav Damak Rabbi Meir, Ushmuel Damak Rabbi Huda. It must be that Rav holds like Rabbi Meir, and Shmuel holds like Rabbi Huda. What are we talking about? Here we go. The Sanya. Haomer li Isha, Hariat Mikudeshes li Almanas she'in lach alai sher ksus va'ona. So this guy is a winner, right? This is a keeper, right? So listen to this, right? Reuben goes over to Rochel, and Reuben says to Rochel, become married to me on the condition that you have no claims against me for food, clothing, or intimacy. So essentially, remember again, share, ksus, and ona are the entitlements that a woman has in marriage. So here Reuben is essentially saying to her, become married to me on the condition that you have none of these biblical entitlements against me. So what's halacha? Harezu mikudeshes, utuna batal div Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, they're married, and the Tanai is batal. And I will say, what's Rabbi Meir's logic? Rabbi Meir holds, masna almasha kasa batora, Tanai batal. In general, whenever you make a Tanai, which runs counter to biblical law, your Tanai is batal. Tanai is batal. So therefore, it's very nice to make the Tanai becoming Kudesh, on the condition that you don't have any share, ksus, and ona. That's fine. We essentially will say, we ignore the Tanai, and the marriage is binding. Rabbi Huda says, but davar sheba mamon tino kaim. I will say, it's interesting. Whereas Rabbi Huda says, normally I would agree with that principle of masna masha kasabatar tana batal. When you make a Tanai, it runs contrary to biblical law, your Tanai is batal. But when it comes to monetary matters, it works. Right? Why? Because when it comes to monetary matters, a person has the ability to go ahead and give up a monetary entitlement. So therefore, again, if Rochel, now interestingly enough, in this case over here, it also includes ona, right, which is intimacy. Okay, we'll leave that on the side for now. But Lamaisa, she has the right to say, listen, I'm entitled to food and to clothing. I'm willing to give up the right. I'm willing to yield. So therefore, again, Rabbi Huda will say, the Tanai works. Amar l'charav. So we'll say, so therefore, the Gemara is suggesting over here that Rav, we can line up Rav with Rabbi Meir and Shmuel with Rabbi Huda. Then we'll say Rav says that if I go over to Reuben and say, Reuben, I'm selling you grain, but on the condition that this transaction is not subject to ona. So Rav says it is subject to ona. That's the same Rabbi Meir who says that she is entitled to share ksus and ona. And Rabbi Yehuda and Shmuel says the transaction is not subject to ona, which is the same. Right, which means that tonight works, which is the same Rabbi Yehuda who holds that she doesn't have a claim of share ksus and ona against him. So we're lining up the positions with each other. Tush Gemara says maybe not. Rav says, Rabbi Yehuda. Rav says, I could even be in alignment with Rabbi Yehuda. How so? Ad kano kam Rabbi Yehuda hasam ela diyada v'kamachla. So Rabbi say in the case of share ksus and ona, so Rabbi say there is an understood there. What right? Reuven is going over to Rochel. Reuven is saying to Rochel, become mikudeshes to me on the condition that you have no claim for share ksus and ona. So Rochel knows exactly what she's getting into, and Rochel knows exactly what she is forgiving. That's when Rabbi Yehuda says that ultimately again the Tanai works because she knows what she is giving up. Amud Beis aval hacha miyada demacho. But I will say in this case over here, how does the purchaser know what they are or aren't giving up? Again, remember again, what's happening over here? I'm going over to Reuven. I'm saying Reuven, I want to sell you wheat, right? I'm going to charge you whatever the charge is going to be, and you have no claim of ona. Reuven doesn't know, is there ona, not ona? So I will say what Rav is suggesting is the following, that there is a difference between being mochel on, there's a difference on giving up something when you know what you are giving up, versus being mochel, giving up something when you don't really know what it is that you're giving up. Take a look at Rashi. Type Rashi, Nun Alpha, base 51b. So the Gemara says, Miyada, de'ika ona, ha'u savar de'in ba'ona. So we'll say, here's what's fascinating. In the ona case, remember again, I will say, it's not the pshat that I'm saying, Reuven, I'm selling you wheat, and I just want to let you know, I'm overcharging you by more than a sixth, but you buy this on the condition that there is no ona. We're about to enter into a transaction. Before we even start talking about price, I said, Reuven, here's the deal. So I'll let you know, right, we're going to do this, assuming that you agree that this transaction is not subject to ona. We don't know, is there ona, is there not ona? So Rav says, you can't be mochel on something if you don't know what you're being mochel on. Let's contrast that with the case where Reuven goes over to Rochel, and Reuven says to Rochel, Hariak mikudeshes, they become on the condition that you have no share, ksus, and ona. If Rochel says, okay, then what about say it works? Why does it work? She knows what she is forgiving. You can be mochel on something if you know what you're being mochel on. But if you don't know what you're being mochel on, then that mechila is meaningless. Incredible. Shmuel will say, Ana da'am yafil Rabbi Meir. Shmuel will say the truth is, I hold even like Rabbi Meir. Also, ad kan lo kam Rabbi Meir hasam ela divadai ka'akri. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Meir says, in his case, ultimately, again, there is most certainly an akira. There's most certainly an uprooting of biblical law. Right? They will say, remember again, in the case of where Reuven says to Rochel, become mikudeshes on the condition that you have no claim for share, ksus, and ona. So I will say, there's that is an unequivocal uprooting of biblical law. That's what Rabbi Meir says, masna amash shakasav batorah t'na'o batal. That's when he says t'na'o batal. There's the definitive uprooting. Aval hacha mi yemed ka'avar midi. I will say once again in the ona case is undefined. So because it's undefined, who says that halacha l'maisa there's going to be an uprooting of the laws of ona? Maybe yes or maybe no. Okay. Amr Ravanan. So I just want to point out. So we thought. So here's what we have. So remember again, our question for us is: can you engage in a transaction where the seller says to the buyer, "We're doing this on the condition that there is no ona"? Does that work? Rav says no. It's subject to ona because you are stipulating contrary. You are making a stipulation or a condition contrary to biblical law. And whenever you do that, masna amasha kasu batorah to no batal. And Shmuel says no, it works. We tried to line up this machlokes Rav and Shmuel with the machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda by kiddushin, and it turns out the Gemara says that they don't really line up. That's not wrong. Fine, so let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. So we haven't answered our question yet. So Amar Rav Anan ledidi mefar shalei minei demar Shmuel. I heard the following from Mar Shmuel. Ha'omer lechavero almanas she'im lecha alay ona ein lo alav ona. So I said, listen to this. This is now quite fascinating. So now Rav Anan said like this. I heard the following distinction. That I will say, really, it's all about how you say it. What does that mean? Listen to this. I go over to Reuven. I say, Reuven, I'm going to engage in this transaction with you. Almanas she'in lecha alai ona, on the condition that you have no claim against me for ona. So then I will say, what's the halacha? Ein lo alav ona. Then that works. However, watch this. Almanas she'ein bo ona. But if you make a condition, right? I go over to Reuven and say, Reuven, I'm selling you this object on the condition that there is no ona'ah in this transaction. Harayesh bo ona. Then that transaction is subject to ona. Now, what's the difference between the two Lashonos? In Lashon number 1, I'm saying to Reuven, we're going to do this on the condition that you have no claim against me. Okay? So Rabbi says, we're suggesting that is going to work. Why? Because Rabbi say essentially the way we interpret that is like this. Reuven, even if there is ona in this transaction, you agree not to pursue the claim. I'm not saying there's not ona. But you're agreeing not to pursue a claim that you have against me. Gemara says that could work. However, if you say that this transaction should not be governed by the laws of ona, that you can't do. Why can't you do that? Because that's a Tanai which runs contrary to Torah law. And when you Torah, when make a title runs contrary to Torah law, then to know battle. Pretty incredible. Also, take a look at Rashi. So the Gemara says, She'in ba'ona, im amar lo b'lashon zeh, in zeh lashon mechilas ona, elo lashon tvias ona. So we'll say this is fascinating. So essentially, when I say to Reuven, we're going to do this transaction on the condition that you don't have a claim against me. So we'll say, so again, or you don't, what was lashon? She'in lecha alai ona. You have no ona against me. What that's saying is, I'm not saying there's not ona. I'm not saying ona doesn't govern this transaction. I'm saying you are agreeing to waive your rights against me. That works. But to say a transaction shouldn't be governed by the laws of ona, then I will say the problem is that is a Tanai which runs contrary to Torah law. Such a fascinating distinction. Okay, let's go back there. So Metzia, you want to raise the kasha? Okay. So actually, if we just finish that Rashi, look at that Rashi. She'in ba'ona, im amar lo b'lashon zeh, in zeh lashon mechilas ona. This is not the lashon of forgiving the ona. Ella lashon tvias ona. The almanas she'in bo ona amar v'hari yesh bo. Shabo say you can't make a claim that says on the condition that there is no ona in this transaction, because what if there is? Umekachtos nami havi v'imrasa lachsor chozer legamrei. Shabo say so. It's interesting. So you can make a tanai which essentially has mechila, which has forgiveness of a claim against me. But you can't legislate that the transaction is not governed by ona. That you can't do. So may say, Sigmar is the kasha, hanose b'nosein ba'amana. So we'll say this is actually very interesting. If you engage in what we'll call no saving ba'amana. So we'll say no saving ba'amana means like this. Look at Rashi. Hanose ba'amana. Machar b'ma shetuchal v'tein lo hamos u'lizman ploni v'hineni somech alecha v'nosei no skar terechol kidul kaman. So we'll say no saving ba'amana means like this. I give merchandise to Reuven, and I give it to him essentially without any explicit instructions. I say, listen, go out and sell it. Get the best price you can. And I trust Reuven with the merchandise. Right? So it's not, I don't say to him, sell it for X amount, come back with X amount of money. I just give it to him and I say, get it done. So no say ma'amana. V'omer lechavera amanas she'in lecha alai ona, ein lo alav ona. So I will say, interestingly enough, I will say, in this case, where you go ahead and you give the merchandise, I give the merchandise to Reuven. I say, Reuven, go ahead and sell it and just get the best price possible. There is no ona in that case. It's fascinating, right? Look at Rashi. Ein lo alav ona, lomar yoser hayeshabeh, v'machar zed damim ramim, ein lo yachal, lomar lo atem lechel damav. So both say, it's fascinating. So Allah, if I give the merchandise to Reuven, and Reuven comes back with less money than I thought he should have gotten, I don't have any claim of ona against him. I claim, you could have sold it for more. Or, if Reuven goes ahead and sell it for more, he can't keep part of the money for himself, claiming you only thought I was going to sell it for X. I sold it for X plus Y. Furthermore, again, if I say to my friend, on the condition that you don't have ona against me, there is no ona. So the Rav da Amar, Ana da Amri Afil Rabbi Yehuda, Hamani. So according to Rav, who says that my position could even be according to Rabbi Yehuda, whose opinion is reflected over here? Amar Abaye mechavarta Rav Amar Rabbi Meir u'Shmuel Amar Rabbi Yehuda. So once we're going back now, Abaye says it would appear to be clear that halacha l'maisa Rav holds like Rabbi Meir and Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Rava Amar Rava says no, lo kasha. There's not a contradiction here. Kan bistam kan b'mefarish. Two different cases. One, we'll say, look at Rashi, stam, almanas she'ein lecha alay ona, delo yada denecho. Mefarish, shepiresh lo, yodea ani sheyesh ba'ona, vani mocher lecha almanas she'ein lecha alay ona, de baha amar Rabbi Yehuda, de masna utno kayim, de dami the sherksus. So we'll say, interestingly enough, in a case of stam, ultimately, again, where halacha l'maisa, you just make a general statement of what? I'm selling you this on the condition that you don't have any claim by ona. So we'll say, in this particular case, the Gemara is suggesting over here, the Tanai doesn't work. Why doesn't the Tanai work? Because the purchaser doesn't know whether or not there's ona. So once again, going back to what we said before, you can't be mochel on something that you don't know about. It's even a generic statement like, if there happens to be ona over here, you are mochel. A generic statement like that is not going to work. Why? Because the seller or the purchaser doesn't know if there is ona. As opposed to, I will say, a case that says like this. Seller says to the purchaser, I know there is ona in this case, but I'm selling it to you on the condition that you forgive the ona. That works. Why does it work? So we'll say, so it works, number one, because I'm not saying that the transaction shouldn't be subject to ona. I'm saying our agreement should be subject to ona. You're being mochel, and now the seller also knows what it is that he's being mochel. So we'll say it's twofold. Number one, it's mechila. I'm agreeing, right? The purchaser is agreeing not to pursue the claim, and the seller is able to forgive it. Why? Because he knows explicitly what it is that he is forgiving. Incredible. The Sanya, when is this so? The stam. Aval b'mefarish, where I will say if it's a case of where it's explicit, b'mefarish mocher, sha'amar lo-lokeach, where the seller says to the purchaser, chayfetz zeh sha'ani mocher lecha b'masayim. Sorry, seller says to the purchaser, I know, I'm selling you this object for 200 zuz, yodea ani bo she'eno shava ela mana. I know that it's only worth 100. And I know that I'm selling it to you for 200. Almanas she'ein lecha alay ona, ein lo alav ona. So I'll say, here it is. So this is fascinating. So how could you potentially sidestep ona in a transaction? It requires this twofold piece. Number one, for the seller to explicitly say, I know that I'm overcharging you for this. I know that I'm overcharging, and I'm selling it to you on the condition that you don't have a claim of ona against me. This works. Why does it work twofold? Number one, because the seller is not saying on the condition that there is no ona in this transaction. Because if you use that lashon, then what? Then what? Then you are being masna, and then you are stipulating, making a stipulation that runs contrary to Torah law. Can't do that. So here the seller is saying on the condition you don't have a claim of ona, and he's explicitly articulating what the ona is. In that case, the purchaser knows what he's being mochel, and therefore it works. So to Abba again, if a purchaser says to the seller, this object that I'm buying from you that's worth 100, I know it's worth 200. So Abba said, this is the seller underbuying it. He says, Ein lo olavana. So I will say, so bottom line, we'll have to stop over here for today. But bottom line, I will say, what turns out is like this. There could be a case where you could sidestep ona. What does it require? Number one, you can never say on the condition that this transaction is not governed by ona. Because if you say those words, then you are stipulating contrary to Torah law. And whenever you do that, tina batal. But what can you do? Purchaser, right? Seller and buyer can be exclusive with each other. Seller says, I know that I'm overcharging you. This is on the condition that you accept the overcharge. So number one, the seller is saying you forgive your claim against me. That's number one. And seller also says, and buyer knows exactly what he's forgiving, and vice versa. In those cases, ultimately, again, I will say, it works. Shkoyach was stop over today. Tremendous. Shkoyach, everyone. All right, everyone, Zoom. Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos.